Elijah Matthews ran a tired hand through his unkempt dark hair, his fingers brushing against the faint stubble on his jaw. He exhaled sharply, his breath clouding in the artificially chilled airport air. The hard plastic chair beneath him was unforgiving, but he had no choice. His flight had been canceled, his wallet was nearly empty, and his 6-year-old daughter, Lily, was curled up on his lap, asleep against his chest. He adjusted the thin blanket he had managed to grab from a passing flight attendant, making sure Lily was warm. His heart ached. He was supposed to be back in Chicago by now, supposed to have tucked her into her own bed. But instead, they were stranded in an airport overnight, with nothing but vending machine snacks and exhaustion weighing them down. A soft sigh beside him made him glance to his right. A woman sat there, her long legs crossed elegantly, her gaze focused on the phone she had placed on the armrest between them. She was stunning dark brown hair in a sleek ponytail, sharp cheekbones, and eyes that looked like they had seen more than they let on. She was dressed in an expensive-looking black coat, her posture effortlessly poised despite the uncomfortable seats. Elijah didn't mean to stare, but she was so out of place in the fluorescent-lit chaos of the airport. Whoever she was, she didn't belong here. The woman must have felt his gaze because she turned her head slightly, her hazel eyes meeting his. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she glanced down at Lily, who was curled up against him, her tiny hand gripping his shirt. "She's adorable," the woman murmured, her voice smooth but not unkind. Elijah hesitated before nodding. "Yeah, she is." The woman studied him for a moment, then looked back at her phone. "Flight canceled." "Yeah, you too," she nodded. "I was supposed to be in New York hours ago." Elijah let out a dry chuckle. "Guess we're both out of luck." A silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. If anything, there was an odd sense of understanding, two strangers caught in the same unfortunate situation. After a while, Lily stirred in his arms, blinking sleepily. She looked up at him, then at the woman beside them. "Daddy," she mumbled, "are we home yet?" Elijah's chest tightened. "Not yet, sweetheart." "Go back to sleep." Lily turned her head towards the woman, her small face scrunching in curiosity. "Who's that?" The woman smiled, an actual smile this time. "I'm Veronica." Lily blinked at her, then yawned. "You're pretty." Veronica let out a soft laugh. "Thank you." "You're pretty too." Lily giggled sleepily before resting her head back against Elijah's chest. Within moments, she was asleep again. "You're good with her," Veronica said quietly. Elijah shifted, adjusting Lily's weight. "She's my world." Something flickered across Veronica's face, something he couldn't quite read. She looked like she wanted to say something, but instead she just nodded. Hours passed, the airport growing quieter as the night deepened. Elijah tried to stay awake, but exhaustion weighed on him. He let his head tilt back against the chair, his grip on Lily firm even in sleep. When he woke, the first thing he noticed was warmth. A blanket, an actual thick blanket, had been draped over him and Lily. He blinked, confused, before glancing to his right. Veronica was still there, though now she was speaking quietly to someone on her phone. He caught snippets of the conversation, something about rescheduling meetings, about handling things remotely. Elijah sat up carefully, making sure not to wake Lily. "Did you?" He gestured at the blanket. Veronica glanced at him, then shrugged. "You looked cold." He stared at her for a moment, then chuckled softly. "Thanks." She didn't respond right away. Instead, she studied him, her hazel eyes sharp. "You don't travel much, do you?" Elijah let out a breath. "Not if I can help it." "Work," he hesitated. "Something like that." Veronica arched a brow but didn't press. Instead, she leaned back in her seat. "You're a good dad." The words caught him off guard. He swallowed, looking down at Lily. "I try." For a moment, Veronica looked like she wanted to say something else, but instead she just nodded. The airport announcements droned on overhead, other stranded passengers shifting in their seats, waiting for morning. But Elijah barely noticed. Because for the first time in what felt like forever, He wasn't just another exhausted, struggling father trying to make it through the night. He was sitting beside a woman who saw him. And for some reason, he couldn't look away. The morning light filtered through the airport's glass walls, casting a soft golden hue over the waiting area. The quiet murmur of passengers waking up and stretching filled the space, accompanied by the occasional crackling of airport announcements. Elijah shifted in his seat, his neck stiff from sleeping upright. He glanced down at Lily, still curled up against him, her tiny fingers clutching the edge of his shirt as if afraid he'd disappear. Then he remembered the blanket. His gaze flicked to Veronica. She was still beside him, but now she was reading something on her tablet, her brows slightly furrowed in concentration. The sleek device reflected the sharp lines of her face, and despite the early morning exhaustion lingering in the air, she looked as composed as ever. Elijah hesitated. He wasn't used to kindness, at least not from strangers. "Thank you," he said, his voice still rough from sleep. Veronica didn't look up immediately, only tilting her head slightly in acknowledgement. "For what?" He lifted the blanket slightly. "This," she shrugged, setting the tablet down. "You needed it." There was something about the way she said it simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. No expectation for gratitude, no ulterior motive, just a quiet understanding. Lily stirred then, stretching her small limbs before blinking up at him. Her face scrunched in confusion as she looked around. "Are we home now?" Elijah sighed, smoothing her hair. "Not yet, sweetheart, soon." Veronica watched their exchange with a thoughtful expression. "How old is she?" 6, Elijah answered, adjusting Lily's coat. "She's very sweet." Lily, still groggy, turned her head toward Veronica and studied her with sleepy curiosity. "You have pretty hair." Elijah exhaled a quiet laugh, shaking his head. "She doesn't hold back." Veronica's lips quirked, but her eyes remained warm. "I appreciate the honesty." Lily, apparently satisfied with her assessment, yawned dramatically before resting her head back against Elijah's chest. A heavy silence settled between them, not uncomfortable but weighted with something unsaid. Elijah stole a glance at Veronica, noting the way her fingers tapped absently against the armrest, as if debating something internally. Finally, she broke the silence. "Where were you before this?" Elijah hesitated, then ran a hand over his tired face. "Visiting my parents. My dad hasn't been doing well, and I wanted Lily to see him." Veronica's expression softened, the sharpness of her usual composure momentarily dimming. "I'm sorry," he nodded, appreciating the sincerity in her voice. "It's been a lot." She didn't press for details, and he was grateful for that. Instead, she adjusted her posture slightly, as if considering her next words carefully. "You live in Chicago." "Yeah, New York." Elijah wasn't surprised. She had the poised, sharp efficiency of someone who thrived in a city that never slowed down. Before he could say anything else, an announcement crackled overhead, informing them of updated flight schedules. Elijah glanced at the screen, scanning for his flight number. Relief washed over him when he saw that their flight would finally be boarding in an hour. "Well," he exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Looks like we're finally getting out of here." Veronica followed his gaze to the screen, nodding slightly. "Looks like it." There was something oddly final about it, like the end of an unexpected interlude neither of them had planned for. Elijah shifted, suddenly aware of how strange this was. He had spent the night beside a woman he didn't know, sharing quiet conversations and fleeting glances, and yet, it felt significant. Lily, now more awake, tugged at his sleeve. "Daddy, I'm hungry." He glanced at her, then at his wallet, mentally calculating what was left. His funds were stretched thin after the unexpected travel changes, and airport food wasn't exactly cheap. Before he could figure out a plan, Veronica stood. "Come on," she said, adjusting her coat. Elijah frowned. "What?" "There's a cafe down the hall. Let's get something to eat." His brows pulled together. "Veronica, you don't have to, I know." She met his gaze evenly. "But I want to." Something about the way she said it left no room for argument. Lily, oblivious to the silent exchange, perked up. Pancakes, Veronica actually smiled. I think we can manage that. Elijah sighed, knowing he should refuse, but the exhaustion and the quiet sincerity in Veronica's expression made it impossible. So he stood, adjusting Lily on his hip, and followed Veronica through the airport. The cafe was small but warm, the scent of coffee and fresh pastries filling the air. Veronica ordered without hesitation, adding a hot chocolate for Lily and coffee for Elijah before he could protest. You really didn't have to do this, he said as they settled into a booth. I know. She took a sip of her coffee, watching him over the rim, but I wanted to. He studied her, trying to figure her out. She was composed, confident, and clearly used to making decisions quickly. But there was something else, something beneath the polished exterior. Lily, happily munching on a piece of toast, kicked her legs under the table. Do you have kids? She asked Veronica curiously. Veronica's expression flickered just for a second before she shook her head. No, Lily frowned slightly as if trying to process that. But you should. You'd be a nice mom. Elijah nearly choked on his coffee. Lily, he muttered, but Veronica only laughed softly. That's very sweet of you to say. Lily nodded sagely, as if she had settled the matter. Elijah rubbed the back of his neck. Sorry about her. She doesn't have much of a filter. Veronica waved it off. I like honesty. He believed her. The conversation drifted after that, moving from small talk to fleeting glimpses of their lives. Veronica didn't offer much about herself, but Elijah caught the edges of something deeper: long hours, high expectations, a life spent in constant motion. And yet, here she was, sitting in a cramped airport cafe with a struggling single dad and his 6-year-old daughter, buying them breakfast like it was the most natural thing in the world. Their flight was called over the intercom and reality settled in. Elijah stood, adjusting Lily's coat. Guess this is it. Veronica nodded, but there was something unreadable in her expression. He hesitated, then extended a hand. Thank you for everything. She took it, her grip firm and warm. Safe flight, Elijah. He turned to go, but just before he disappeared into the crowd, he glanced back. Veronica was still watching him. And somehow, he knew this wasn't the last time their paths would cross. Elijah stepped off the plane with Lily's hand in his mind still lingering on the woman he'd met at the airport. Veronica. He hadn't expected to think about her after they parted ways, but there she was, occupying space in his thoughts. It was strange he barely knew her, and yet something about her had settled under his skin. The biting chill of Chicago's winter wrapped around them as they exited the terminal. Elijah adjusted Lily's coat, making sure she was bundled up before leading her toward the ride-share pickup area. His bank account was already stretched thin, but walking home in this cold wasn't an option. He'd figure it out. He always did. Lily yawned and leaned against his side. Are we going home now? He squeezed her small hand. Yeah, sweetheart, we're going home. The ride back to their apartment was quiet. Lily dozed off, and Elijah stared out the window, taking in the familiar streets. The city always felt different after a trip, as if things had shifted in his absence. The towering buildings loomed overhead, their lights flickering against the early evening sky. When they finally reached their apartment complex, Elijah carried Lily inside, her small arms wrapped around his neck. Their place wasn't big, a modest 2-bedroom with creaky floors and outdated fixtures, but it was home. He set her down on the couch, pulled off her boots, and draped a blanket over her before heading to the kitchen. He flipped on the coffee maker, rubbing the fatigue from his eyes. The trip had drained him, and his bank account wasn't in any better shape than before. He needed to pick up extra shifts, needed to figure out how to keep things afloat. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. Frowning, he walked over and opened it. His neighbor, Mrs. Calloway, stood there with a plate of cookies in her hands. She was in her 60s, with kind eyes and a habit of checking in on them. I saw your light on, she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Thought you two might want something sweet after your trip. Elijah managed a tired smile. You didn't have to do that. Nonsense. She set the plate down on the counter, then turned to him with a knowing look. You holding up all right, he sighed, running a hand through his hair. As much as I can. Mrs. Calloway nodded, her gaze softening. You're doing good, Elijah. Don't forget that. He swallowed, suddenly feeling the weight of everything pressing down on him. Thanks. After she left, he sat down at the small dining table, staring at the plate of cookies without really seeing them. His mind drifted back to Veronica. She had money more than he could probably comprehend. The way she carried herself, the confidence, the ease with which she had bought them breakfast without a second thought. She was in a different world, and yet for a few hours it hadn't felt like it. Days passed, and life resumed its usual rhythm. Work, school drop-offs, late nights balancing bills and responsibilities. Elijah tried to push thoughts of Veronica aside, but she had left an imprint he couldn't quite shake. Then, on a cold Thursday afternoon, something unexpected happened. Elijah had just finished his shift at the auto repair shop when his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, frowning at the unfamiliar number. He almost ignored it, but something made him answer. Elijah Matthews. His grip tightened on the phone. Who's asking? This is Jeremy Connors, the voice on the other end said smoothly. I work with Veronica Hart. Elijah froze. I hope I'm not interrupting, but Miss Hart asked me to reach out. She would like to meet with you. His heart pounded. Meet me? Why? I believe she'll want to explain that herself. Are you available tomorrow morning? Elijah hesitated, his instincts screaming that this was absurd. But curiosity gnawed at him. Why would a woman like Veronica Hart, a woman who probably ran an empire, want to see him again? Against his better judgment, he found himself saying, Yeah. I can be there. Jeremy gave him an address, a high rise in the heart of the city, and the call ended. Elijah stood there for a long moment, staring at his phone. What the hell had he just agreed to? The next morning, he found himself standing outside an impossibly sleek glass building, the kind that reeked of power and wealth. He adjusted the collar of his jacket, suddenly aware of how out of place he looked. He didn't belong here, but he had come this far. Taking a steadying breath, he stepped inside. The lobby was pristine, all marble floors and towering windows that overlooked the city. A receptionist greeted him with a polite nod before directing him to the top floor. When the elevator doors opened, he was led to an office that was nothing short of breathtaking. Floor-to-ceiling windows stretched across the room, offering a panoramic view of Chicago's skyline. A sleek desk sat near the center, and behind it, Veronica Hart stood, watching him with an unreadable expression. Elijah, she said, her voice warm but measured. I'm glad you came. He crossed his arms, unsure of what to say. You tracked me down. A small smile played at the corner of her lips. I did. Why? She gestured to the chair across from her desk. Sit. He hesitated before lowering himself into the seat. Veronica leaned forward slightly, her hazel eyes searching his. I haven't been able to stop thinking about you. His stomach tightened. Veronica, I know this is unexpected, she interrupted gently, but I don't believe in ignoring things that matter. And for some reason you matter. Elijah exhaled sharply. We spent one night in an airport, Veronica. That doesn't mean. It meant something to me. The sincerity in her voice caught him off guard. This isn't about charity, she continued, as if reading his thoughts. I'm not here to help you or fix anything. I just want to know you. He ran a hand over his face, his mind spinning. This was insane. And yet, the way she looked at him like he was someone worth knowing made it hard to walk away. After a long pause, he finally said, I don't know what you're expecting. Veronica's lips curved slightly. Neither do I. And somehow that was enough to make him stay. Elijah wasn't sure how it had happened, but somewhere between that morning in Veronica's office and the weeks that followed, she became a part of his life. It started small, a phone call here, a lunch meeting there. He told himself he was being cautious, that he wasn't letting her in too much. But then he'd catch himself checking his phone, hoping she'd reach out. And she always did. Veronica didn't push. She never asked for more than he was willing to give. But somehow, without him realizing it, she had woven herself into his days. One evening, when he picked up Lily from school, she bounced toward him with a grin. "Daddy, guess what?" He lifted her into his arms, adjusting her backpack. "What?" "My teacher said we get to do a parent lunch next week where we invite someone special." She tilted her head. "Can Miss Veronica come?" Elijah hesitated, caught off guard. "You really want her to?" Lily nodded enthusiastically. "She's nice, and she listens to you. And she makes you smile." He swallowed hard. "She makes me smile." Lily poked his cheek. "Like this." Elijah chuckled, shaking his head. All right. I'll ask her." That night, when he called Veronica, he expected hesitation, maybe even a polite excuse. Instead, she answered immediately. "I'd love to." And that was how Elijah found himself sitting across from her in a tiny elementary school cafeteria, surrounded by excited children and tired parents, watching as Veronica helped Lily open a juice box like it was the most natural thing in the world. She wasn't dressed in her usual sharp business attire. Instead, she had on a soft blue sweater that made her eyes look brighter, her hair falling in relaxed waves over her shoulders. She fit here, in a way Elijah hadn't expected. Lily chattered away, oblivious to the way Elijah kept stealing glances at Veronica. She laughed at his daughter's stories, asked her questions, genuinely listened. And when Lily got up to grab a napkin, Veronica turned to Elijah with a quiet smile. "She's incredible." His chest tightened. "She is." Veronica hesitated before saying, "I wasn't sure if you'd want me here." Elijah exhaled slowly. "I wasn't sure either." She didn't look hurt, just understanding. "But you asked anyway." He met her gaze. "Yeah." There was something in her expression, something unspoken but undeniable. He didn't know how to name it, but he felt it. After that day, things shifted. Veronica became more than just an unexpected presence in his life. She became someone he relied on. She never tried to replace anything, never overstepped, but she was there. When he had a rough day at work, she'd send him a message, something simple but thoughtful. When Lily had a school event, she'd ask about it, genuinely interested. One evening, after Lily had gone to bed, Elijah found himself sitting on his couch, his phone in his hand. He hesitated before calling Veronica. She answered on the second ring. "Hey." He leaned back against the cushions, staring at the ceiling. "Hey, long day." "Yeah." A pause. "Then want me to come over?" He closed his eyes for a moment, exhaling. "Yeah." When she arrived, she didn't say much. She just sat beside him, her presence warm and steady. They didn't need words, and that was when Elijah knew he was in love with her. It terrified him. But when she turned to him, her gaze searching his, he knew he wasn't alone in it. Veronica Hart, the woman who had spent a single night in an airport beside him, had become his everything. And he wasn't letting go. Elijah never would have imagined that a single night in an airport could alter the course of his life. But as the weeks passed, Veronica's presence became undeniable, woven into his days, and filling the spaces he hadn't even realized were empty. It wasn't just the quiet moments they shared, or the way she so effortlessly fit into his life with Lily. It was more than that. It was the way she looked at him, like he was someone worth knowing, someone worth fighting for. And despite every instinct telling him to be cautious, to protect the fragile stability he had built for himself and his daughter, he couldn't resist her. One evening, after Lily had gone to bed, Elijah found himself sitting across from Veronica in his small apartment, the hum of the city outside their only background noise. She was seated on the couch, her posture relaxed in a way that was rare for her. He had come to learn that Veronica was always in motion, always thinking 2 steps ahead. But with him, she allowed herself to just be. "I have something to tell you," she said, breaking the silence. Elijah set his drink down, studying her expression. "That sounds serious." A small breath escaped her. "It is." He leaned forward slightly, bracing himself. "All right. She hesitated, her fingers tracing the curve of the cushion beside her. I haven't been completely honest about who I am. His jaw tightened. Veronica, not like that, she interrupted softly. I mean, you know I run a company, but you don't know just how much of my life has been dictated by it. Elijah exhaled, waiting. She looked down as if gathering her thoughts. My father built Hart Enterprises from the ground up. He was ruthless in business, and growing up, I was expected to follow in his footsteps. Every move I made, every decision, it was all leading to one thing: taking over. Elijah remained silent, letting her speak. For years, I convinced myself that was what I wanted. That power, that control, but lately. She met his gaze, her hazel eyes filled with something raw. Meeting you, meeting Lily, it's made me realize how much I've missed. Elijah's heart pounded. Veronica, what are you saying? I'm saying that for the first time in my life, I don't want to make decisions based on expectations. She inhaled deeply. I want to make them based on what makes me happy. He swallowed hard. And what makes you happy? She gave a soft, almost disbelieving laugh. You, Lily, this. She gestured between them. I never expected it, but I don't want to walk away from it. Elijah's chest ached with something he hadn't let himself fully acknowledge until now. I know this is complicated, she continued. I know we come from different worlds, but I don't care about that. Elijah ran a hand over his face, trying to process the weight of her words. He had spent so long keeping people at a distance, convinced that love, real, lasting love, wasn't something he could afford to gamble on. But Veronica wasn't just anyone. She was the woman who had seen him at his lowest and hadn't looked away. She was the woman who had chosen him despite having everything, and he loved her, more than he had ever thought possible. You scare me, he admitted finally. Veronica's expression softened. Why? Because you make me want things I told myself I couldn't have, he exhaled sharply. Because if I let myself believe this is real and then lose it. She reached for his hand, her fingers warm and steady against his. You're not going to lose me, Elijah. His throat tightened. I'm not asking you to change your life for me, she said gently. And I'm not going to pretend that what we have will always be easy, but I am asking you to let me in. To trust that I'm not going anywhere. Elijah looked at her, really looked at her, and in that moment he made a decision. He wasn't going to let fear dictate his future, not this time. So he pulled her closer, his lips brushing against hers in a kiss that held everything he hadn't been able to say. And in that moment, he knew whatever happened next, they would face it together. Winter's crisp air settled over Chicago, turning the city into a wonderland of twinkling lights and frost-kissed streets. Elijah found himself walking beside Veronica, their hands brushing as they made their way down a quiet street lined with small boutiques. Snowflakes drifted lazily from the sky, catching in her dark hair, and when she turned to him with a soft smile, he felt something tighten in his chest. They were past the stage of uncertainty now. Past hesitation. Over the past few months, Veronica had become more than just a presence in his life. She was woven into it, as natural as breathing. She had met Lily's teachers, attended school events, and even spent quiet evenings in their small apartment, curled up on the couch with them, reading bedtime stories. And Elijah, he had let her in. Completely. Tonight, however, something felt different. There was an energy in the air, a shift that neither of them had spoken about but both could feel. Veronica slowed to a stop in front of a small, elegant jewelry store. The window display was decorated for the season, filled with delicate pieces that sparkled under the golden glow of the lights. Elijah followed her gaze, his pulse picking up slightly. She didn't say anything at first, just studied the rings in the window with quiet contemplation. Then after a moment, she turned to him, her hazel eyes searching his face. Elijah, she said softly, her voice carrying something unspoken. He swallowed, already knowing where this was going. Yeah, she hesitated, then exhaled, her breath curling in the cold air. Have you thought about what comes next? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached for her hand, lacing their fingers together. I think about it all the time, he admitted, her grip tightened slightly. And Elijah glanced down at their joined hands, then back at her. I don't want a life without you in it. Something flickered in her gaze, hope, maybe even relief. Then why are we waiting? He let out a quiet breath, his free hand sliding into his coat pocket. He had planned this differently, had wanted to wait for the perfect moment. But standing here, watching the snow fall around them, feeling the warmth of her hand in his, he realized there was no moment more perfect than this. Elijah, she prompted gently when he didn't speak. He pulled something from his pocket, a small velvet box. Veronica's eyes widened slightly, her breath catching. I was going to wait, he admitted, flipping the box open to reveal a simple but stunning ring. But then I realized there's no reason to. Her lips parted, emotion flickering across her face. I love you, he continued, his voice steady despite the pounding of his heart. And I want to spend the rest of my life with you. You, me, and Lily. Together. For a moment, Veronica just stared at him, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, she smiled. You were really going to wait, she teased, her voice thick with emotion. He chuckled, shaking his head. Maybe a few more weeks, maybe until I could set up some grand romantic gesture, but this feels right. She didn't hesitate, not even for a second. Yes, she whispered. Yes, Elijah. Relief washed over him, followed by something deeper, something more profound. He slid the ring onto her finger, his hand steady despite the whirlwind of emotions crashing through him. When he looked back up, Veronica was already pulling him into a kiss, the cold forgotten as warmth spread through him. Later that evening, after they had returned to his apartment, Lily sat on the couch with wide eyes as Veronica showed her the ring. So does this mean you're going to be my stepmom? Lily asked, tilting her head curiously. Veronica glanced at Elijah before nodding. Yes, sweetheart, it does. Lily grinned. Does that mean we get a big cake at the wedding? Elijah laughed. That's what you're excited about. Obviously, Lily said matter-of-factly. And I want to be the flower girl. Veronica reached out, tucking a strand of Lily's hair behind her ear. You'll be the best flower girl ever. Lily beamed, satisfied with that answer, before hopping off the couch and running to grab one of her storybooks. Elijah turned to Veronica, his heart full. Are you sure you're ready for this? She met his gaze, unwavering. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. And as they sat there, wrapped in the warmth of their small but perfect world, Elijah knew this was the life he had always wanted. A life with her, a life with love, a life that, against all odds, had found him when he least expected it.